So we're going to open up looking at the guy that takes over President Kennedy after his assassination, that being Lyndon Baines Johnson, better known here as LBJ. Now, this guy, a lot different than Kennedy, okay? He was the exact polar opposite of John F. Kennedy. Remember, Kennedy was a Eastern elite prep school kid. LBJ, he grew up in Texas. He grew up poor. Didn't do well in school. He barely got through high school, barely got through college to become a teacher. And he spent a year as a teacher before he got into politics, and worked his way all up to from Texas legislature to Congress, all up to being a senator and majority leader in the Senate. His next step was to look at the presidency, and he became vice president to John F. Kennedy. Kennedy got him to help balance out the ticket. Remember, Kennedy was from the East. He was rich, and so Johnson was this exact opposite to help balance his ticket out and help people from the South vote for Kennedy. Because when you have a president and vice president, usually the vice president will help balance everything out. Now, one of the things this guy could do is he knew everything about everybody. When he was in the Senate, he could know exactly how people were going to vote, what they knew, what they thought about. He knew everything. And he would give people the Johnson treatment, it was called. Now, Johnson was over 6'4", and he would basically stand over people, kind of lean into them a little bit, and start sweet talking them. It was like very intimidating yet flattering. Kind of flatter him and all kind of stuff in order to get his way. And you really know how to get his way and get his way good. Now, one of the things he helps pass right away is called the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This law that he signed into law got rid of all segregation in public place, so basically made segregation illegal countrywide. A lot of places actually integrated right away, and if they don't integrate, there's going to be immediate federal case about it. That March on Washington, the marches in Birmingham, really helped inspire the Civil Rights Act, and it was actually passed as a tribute to Kennedy, who had been talking about doing this act for a long, long time. So one of the things Kennedy wanted to see happen was this act passed, and so it was passed as, in a way, as kind of tribute to John F. Kennedy. Another thing that was ratified in 1964 with the help of Johnson and the Civil Rights Movement was the 24th Amendment. Now, the amendment that was ratified by the states or approved by those states in 1964 made poll taxes illegal. And basically all those voting issues that were hurting voting in the South were now made illegal. And so it really helped a lot in terms of making voting easier for African Americans in the South. Now, to help African Americans use these new rules, there's something called Freedom Summer. The Student Nonviolent Coordination Committee, the SNCC, did a voter registration drive. Now, to vote, you have to register first. And even though the right to vote and all the poll tax, all this stuff was gotten rid of in the South, a lot of African Americans were still too scared to go register to vote. They're afraid of the KKK, and they're called citizens councils, these groups of people that go around and beat up people that are trying to vote and all that kind of stuff. So this group of people, a lot of northern whites from the north, went down to the South, and we're going to help African Americans register. So you're talking a whole bunch of people registering to vote. And the KKK, Ku Klux Klan, these citizens councils, they attacked these so-called freedom riders, both white and black. They would find the buses they came down on, light them on fire. They'd grab people and beat them. They'd have lynchings. They'd people put on arrest for no reason. In fact, even murder. There were two activists and one African American that were murdered in Mississippi. They didn't find the bodies for 2 weeks. They were beaten so badly they couldn't even tell who they actually were. And people started asking questions. Well, there is a manhunt trying to find the bodies and all that kind of stuff. But people asking, well, is it only because there's white people involved, or is it if they're doing the exact same thing for African Americans? Would people have really cared? But so it's kind of this downside of the whole idea. There's a lot of violence and those kind of things happening in Mississippi because of the voter registration drives of some whites trying to stop African Americans from voting. And so that kind of brings a big role going forward here. Here's our example here. This is one of the things here, how our brothers died for freedom, how we're carrying the fight. So really push a lot more people to go and help register for vote, all those kind of things, because of these people basically becoming martyrs, if you will, in the movement. We're on a big topic of Selma, Alabama. We'll look at this a lot too on probably on Thursday and Friday. But in Alabama, still one of the most segregated areas in the country, even after the Civil Rights Act was passed, the governor of Alabama, Governor George Wallace, was a very staunch segregationist. He said segregation is going to be forever. And he has this quote where he says, I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. And he didn't want to let any kind of segregation go away in the state of Alabama. And you started seeing more protests and those things happening in Alabama. And one of the most famous was 1965. It was a 54-mile march in Alabama, and it was actually done as a protest to the shooting of a guy named Jimmy Lee Jackson. This guy was shot during a peaceful march by state troopers. The SCLC, Martin Luther King's group, that organized this march to protest the shooting along Highway 80. And so as they were going to cross this bridge called the Edmund Pettus Bridge, the bridge is here in the picture right there, okay, they were met by state troopers and other people. The sheriff of that county, guy named Jim Clark, had deputized anybody who wanted to become a deputy and gave them a billy club and tear gas. And as this group went across, they were attacked with billy clubs, hit with sticks, like clubs basically. There were tear gas, all that kind of stuff's going on. And this event is called Bloody Sunday. And it's one of these marks that was also seen live on TV. Everyone saw it. You can see how people are getting beat and all kind of stuff in the pictures here. And how tear gas is being used on people. And it was all seen live. And people were saying, wow, this stuff is really happening down south. Even though we passed this amendment, this treatment is still going on. And because of this movement here and the idea of voting, those kind of things, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed to help enforce that 24th Amendment. You know, basically it said that if less than 50% of people to vote when the literacy test round, it assumed discrimination in voting situations. It ended the literacy test in almost all cities because if a town had a literacy test and not everybody was voting, or everybody was passing for that matter, then that city got investigated right away. And this allowed more African Americans to start registered voting. In fact, that sheriff in Selma, Jim Clark, he was defeated in his election because more African Americans could vote, and they voted him out of office. So, kind of a cool story in terms of that. Now, LBJ, I understand this guy had a lot of confidence. He wanted to try and create a program that would make big changes. He grew up poor. He hated seeing poverty in the world. And he promised to finish off that new frontier for Kennedy. He said, civil rights, check, done. Education, medical care, he had to work on it a little bit. Now, the question is, where were the poor in America this time? We look from the 50s, they weren't in the suburbs, okay? Everyone was building out there is doing good. Instead, he focused on the other America. That meant the inner city, minorities, and the small rural towns. And Johnson had a direct connection to this. So when he was a teacher, he taught poor Mexican Americans in a little town in Texas. I mean, and these kids really had no shot, and he kind of said, hey, you have a shot, you can do anything you want to do, and tried to encourage them to do that. And so he's seen poverty firsthand and wanted to try to end poverty in the nation. Just looking at 1960 here, notice 1/5 of all Americans are living below the poverty line, the line of where you're considered to be poor. Out of every 1,000 live births, 1/3 of babies were dying, and that was because of just lack of medical care. 33 out of every 1,000 babies died because of lack of medical care, a lot of babies were still being born at home. If you couldn't afford to go to a hospital, you did not go. Look at how much money was being spent on public schools, okay? Obviously, states fund schools, but the federal government gave them money. The government only spent $25 billion on schools. They're spending much more than that on defense, that kind of stuff. And lastly, you looked at the minimum wage. You said, hey, minimum wage is only $1.25 an hour. That's not, people can't live much on $1.25 an hour. We got to look at this. And so he created opportunities through education. Now, one group was called VISTA, Volunteers in Service to America. It was like the Peace Corps that Kennedy had for foreign countries, but was at home. So people would volunteer to go work and teach in inner city schools, or they would help volunteer tutor kids, that kind of stuff in inner city schools, to help people in the inner cities get a chance to go to college or get a chance to have a better job of getting a better education than they could otherwise. A lot of times the inner city schools weren't that great. And so this VISTA program helped that way. Kind of like Teach for America, if you ever heard of that today. It's the same kind of program going on. He created Head Start, which was basically a preschool program for underprivileged families. That's still around today yet. Preschools were all private back then. You had to pay for it. If you couldn't afford to go to preschool, well, then you didn't go. And Head Start was like a free preschool program from the federal government to help people out. Also, Upward Bound still exists today, too. A program to help poor kids get into college and pay for it. And so we're trying to help education that way. We also see food. The first federal food stamp program gets going. Help make sure kids get food. Kids don't go to bed hungry anymore. He started some of the first federally funded healthcare programs. So there's two different things here. There's Medicare, which is basically federal health insurance for elderly people, and also other two cases too. So that's if you get old, as you get older, you can't have enough money, you can't really afford a lot of stuff, can't afford hospital bills, those kind of things. You have a lot of medical problems. Medicare is a way to help elderly people have medical care they need. So they can be comfortable and take care of issues. Now, at the same time, there's also something called Medicaid. Now, if let's say you have, poverty issues or lose a job, that kind of stuff, and you can't afford medical help, you can go on what's called Medicaid. And you can get help, basically federal health insurance to help you out through medical issues that way. Now, the question is, how do you pay for it? Kind of like Social Security, they made a special tax for it. So you look at your paychecks, when you start getting paychecks, it'll say Medicare, Medicaid on it, and a small portion of your paycheck goes to that every check. And so that's part of that in there too. He also wanted to help the cities out too. So he had a new department about housing, rural development. He tried to help put money into inner cities. He had strict air and water quality things, make sure air and water is good in cities, try to protect endangered species in the countryside. All those kind of things are part of his Great Society, which also had this all legislation for civil rights from the Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, and the Fair Housing Act to make sure that rent was fair and house selling was fair in cities on basic rates. Now, it does have some impact, right? There's a lot of money go to it. A lot of programs need a lot of money. The Vietnam War is going on, which we'll talk about next, and so it didn't get as much money as it probably needed. A lot of programs actually still around today, like the New Deal. It's kind of like a second New Deal, if you will, in terms of that. But poverty had dropped about 10%. But obviously the biggest issues were those civil rights laws. Now, even though the civil rights laws being passed, things aren't exactly equal. And some people get militant. Some people get a little more active and maybe not as nonviolent in the civil rights movements. I mean, some people down south thought that all these rich northern whites were coming down to help people out. They didn't understand what was going on. And so the SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Committee, they started saying, whites stay home. Fight racism up north. Let us, the African American population, take care of civil rights in the South. And started, excluding whites from their rallies, those kind of things in 1965. They also started questioning nonviolence. The idea of number of attacks on civil rights activists kept up going. Here are those 3 kids that were murdered during the Freedom Summer of '64. All these new martyrs are happening. Civil rights workers are getting shot. People are getting killed. Churches and houses are getting bombed. All these things are going on. In Birmingham, that kind of stuff. And, it's just not good. You know what I mean? And so people say, hey, maybe instead of just taking it all the time, like people tell us, we should defend ourselves. And so Stokely Carmichael, leader of the SNCC, starts kind of inciting crowd. He says, we should start, instead of just, taking it, he said the idea of black power. And he just started creating the idea of black power. This guy was arrested 27 times in his lifetime, all right, at different rallies, that kind of stuff. He's kind of that sign of this fist up that said, hey, be proud of who we are as African Americans and, kind of stand for what we believe in instead of taking it all the time. And so there's this renewed pride being African American. I mean, before this, a lot of African Americans tried to, emulate white styles, hairstyle, music style kind of stuff. I mean, African Americans straighten their hair. They dress in, the clothes that, like white people wear kind of stuff. And they said, hey, instead now the Afro hairstyle starts. The dress changes a little bit to have that unique term as an African American. In fact, this is where the term black is used for African Americans versus Negro or color. Those kind of things have been used before. And it was a way to kind of say, hey, be proud of who we are. We're proud of who we are. We don't have to be equal. We can be better at or same as whites that are there. And here you kind of see this very famous Black Power salute. This is 60 Olympics. Tommy Smith, John Carlos, 2 men that won medals 60 Olympics. They give this Black Power salute. And it's very controversial at the time because people were saying, well, is this one appropriate? And 2, you can see high profile African Americans doing this. And the one guy who's not there, just kind of awkward for him. In the 68 Olympics. Another group called the Black Panthers in Oakland, California. They said, hey, we're going to try and protect our people in the cities. And they patrol the streets carrying guns. And they said, hey, you know what? People are going to attack our people with guns and clubs and knives and that kind of stuff. And we're going to do that too. And they said, hey, let's use guns. Let's retaliate if we need to. And it calls themselves the Black Panther Party, and almost like a political party to kind of, help rally success for the African Americans. We also have a guy named Malcolm X. Now, he was born Malcolm Little in Detroit, Michigan. He had a lot of trouble in his youth. His father left early. He was in jail at a very young age. And he became a member of something called the Nation of Islam. Their views are different, okay? Other groups kind of base their beliefs in Christianity, okay? Especially Baptist churches like Martin Luther King Jr. And he kind of bases on the idea of Islam. So his new name, Al-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, was part of the idea of Nation of Islam. They said instead of being equal, it was more about the idea of separation. He even joined the idea of mainstream Islam. And he said separation instead. We're going to stop there. Be part 2, a couple minutes. Check that out in a second. Thanks, guys.